in the industry. I was one of 5,000 coaches initially, and coaching was all about asking questions to bring people to their own awareness in their own context. Well, that doesn't always work for an entrepreneur because they don't have the context.
Our ever-changing world calls upon the most courageous, resilient, and relentless of us to face its most extraordinary challenges. To help you embark on this journey, we present the Impactful Coaching Podcast, your oasis for inspiration and a beacon to spark the fires of greatness within you. I'm Joseph. I will be your ally in this journey to empower your potential. Join us each week as we dive deep into the heart of ambition, drive, and success to unravel compelling stories of daring leaders who dreamed, struggled, and achieved victory. Our journey begins now. How is everybody doing? This is the Impactful Coaching Podcast. My name is Joseph. I'm a media expert. I've been around for about 10 years, but closer to 13 years. I say 10 because much of that time was a write-off. Anyways, I am happy to be a part of this program. The Impactful Coaching Podcast is all about meeting, greeting coaches, networking, which I'm happy to be a part of. So email me, Joseph at Impactful Coaching Podcast, if you want to meet any of the people here. Beyond that, just to help the world, I think, understand how important coaching is. And something that had really been imparted to me at the last episode is that as technology improves and as we innovate in that sector, we actually risk losing a lot of our humanity on the way. And so one of the roles that coaches have been playing is helping people not only retain their humanity, but grow in innovative ways to work with technology and not in spite of it. That's everything that I have to say at the beginning. I'm here with Jackie Nagel. Jackie, how are you doing today? How are you feeling today?
Good. Glad to be back to work after the holidays, believe it or not.
I'm 50-50 on that one, but it really depends if people are finding what.
Yeah.
Just really for me, from my point of view, just like I mean, I was in an apartment for 3 years, and it just got more and more and more expensive, and I definitely burnt myself out, which is something that I was planning on talking to you a little bit about later today. And so when I had moved here, that momentum never stopped. And so the Christmas holidays was a really helpful time to actually like sit back, relax, and let the batteries recharge. But it's very piecemeal being a freelancer. It's like 2 days after Christmas, and then Edit comes in and okay, well, I got to switch gears, sober up, and get to it. On a day like today, I feel good. I'm glad that today is a busy day. And actually, yeah, like the anxiety of not having enough work to do is also kind of setting in too. So it's nice to feel that like, okay, January, start to build things up.
Right.
First thing that we have to do, those of you who have listened to a podcast before, you know what to expect. This is Jackie. Would you kindly let the audience know what you do these days and what you're up to and what is your expertise that we want to talk to you about on the program?
Sure. So my primary focus as a strategic coach is to work with entrepreneurs, to collaborate with them actually on this at the strategic level, to help them to either grow or scale their business, whatever their objective is.
The first impression that I got from looking at your website is that there is an effort to not look at things through a conventional lens, that right. There is a form of alternative thinking. And then in the company itself, you're the founder of Sunuvasha. You taught me how to do this, and I'm still working on it. Sunuvasha. And on your website has a quote, "Unconventional business coaching for predictable growth and success." In the theme of alternative thinking, is there a legacy to that throughout your life's experience?
Sure. I've always felt, well, from the time that I can remember, especially in high school, I always felt like rules were kind of stupid in a way. They didn't make sense to me. I've always been very logical. Math and science were my specialties in high school and college. And so some rules just did not fall into that pattern of math or science. So they were just like, what are these rules and why, right? And what I found as I dug a little bit deeper into the why of the rules, that a lot of rules were established to either control people, a group of people, especially teenagers in high school, or they were based on the rule maker's history. So there was some expert out there that said, do this, do this, do this. Let's say for business, right? You do this, you do this, you do this. And so when I was first new in business, I thought, okay, well, who am I to speak, right? So and so knows so much more than I do, so I'm going to follow their rules. Well, they didn't work. And they didn't work because they worked for that person. That was their rules. It wasn't my rules. And I'm a different person. I have a different lifestyle. So that's kind of where that came from. And I did not want to be the kind of coach that was regurgitating what somebody else was saying because it may not work. In fact, I would even go so far as to say I don't follow the typical coaching pattern
Mhm.
in that, especially like when I trained, it was in what year was it? 97. Coaching was relatively new in the industry. I was one of 5,000 coaches initially, and coaching was all about asking questions to bring people to their own awareness in their own context. Well, that doesn't always work for an entrepreneur because they don't have the context. So one of the things that I did is I went back to school. I got my entrepreneurship at UCLA because I wanted to be able to understand business so that I could work with the business owner in terms of collaborating,
Mhm.
advising, mentoring, coaching, whatever was needed in the moment. I would have the skill and the ability and the knowledge to bring that forward for them to establish their own rules, if you will.
So you have what I consider the legacy experience. A lot of the coaches that we talked to on the program are in the newer space, maybe 4 or 5 years ongoing. But we also have a lot of not as many, but a respective group of people who have experienced it for you said in the 90s, so like
Yeah, 97.
20 years.
27 years.
Do you recall any major like shifts or milestones throughout that time that were indicative of like a new chapter in the coaching industry?
It's kind of interesting that you asked that. I don't know if it was so much a new chapter in the coaching industry as much as it was a chapter in mine,
Hmm.
uh, in my own history, because of the fact that when I realized I was like a square peg in a round hole in the coaching industry, I actually had gotten my hand slapped early on because I asked a question that was a consulting question, not a coaching question. And I thought, oh, wait, this is not my tribe, so to speak. I just could not be that rigid in doing the kind of work that I wanted to do, that I really felt called to do. So I kind of pulled away from the coaching industry. So I
Hmm.
don't really know if they've ever had a chapter in that evolution. But I know that it was important to me to do the kind of work that I wanted to do and that I knew that my clients wanted to do, whether or not it fit in with somebody else's protocol.
Hmm. What sticks out to me, I would say the most is now from my perspective in high school, a lot of my friends, we were the unconventional group. And usually that's characterized by our interests. So there's video games, skateboarding, punk rock. A lot of us were the artists, a lot of illustrators. I myself was a proud animator, and that tends to fit the bill for almost the stereotypical like alternative lifestyle. But because you came from it from a logical point of view, using maths and sciences, the stereotype does not necessarily associate with them. Those are the stereotypes for conventional paths. So, like, how did your development, your interest in sciences and mathematics differ from what maybe other people who were also interested in those spaces had?
I grew up obviously during a different generation than you did as well. The way that I would act out, if you will, my anti-establishment or my anti-rule was I would challenge the rules at school. Like we had dress codes, right? That I just thought were stupid. And so I would dress in a way that would just push the envelope just a little bit to say, see how dumb this rule is? You can do this, but you can't do this. The first career I went from when I went from high school, went into college, I went into the medical profession. I became a nurse. I was a registered nurse. And it was the same thing there. A lot of the rules and regulations that they had, I would challenge them because they didn't make sense to me. So that was the way that I kind of was acting out, if you will, in my unconventional manner. And a lot of it was challenging people to think differently about why we do things the way that we do. Is it just because somebody told us to do them that way? Especially in the medical profession, obviously there are some things that have to be done a certain way because it's a matter of life and death. But there's a lot of gray area that to me were just, again, the things that we were being directed to do were just lacked common sense.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of when, in between my first year and second year of college, I had a pretty bad stomach flu, and I was left with an ulcer, which made me a number of things: lactose intolerant, alcohol intolerant, spices, sugars, salts. I had to go onto a very basic, like, grains in liquid diet. And I remember that was the first time that I had seen a naturopath. My naturopath had told me that was sort of the essence of naturopathy, which is we're not just going to prescribe you something, because prescribing you something just means that we're going after the symptom. Our job is to go after the cause, and to work our way a little bit deeper into why this is continuing to happen and how your other issues might be communicating themselves through this. So if you're stressing out, then your stomach might start hurting. If you're anxious, your stomach might start hurting. So one thing does not necessarily, point A does not necessarily lead to point B. It could be an indicator of a lot of other things going on. And that's the kind of thing that really stuck with me. And it actually ends up being sort of a theme that we talk about a lot on the program, which is when we identify something at the surface level, that's the symptom. But there's things going on underneath that a lot of the coaches that we've talked to are experts at, is figuring out, okay, this is an indicator. Now we're going to go a little deeper. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper until we can unearth the problem from the root and actually create something new in its place.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I trained as a coach, I trained under Thomas Leonard. I had the good fortune of training under him. He was like the godfather of coaching. You may have heard his name through some of the coaches you've interviewed. And one of the models that he gave me that has always stuck with me was called symptom source solution, which is exactly what you talked about. And the way that I look at it, so the source is at the middle, the symptom is around the outside. And then if we can get to and treat the source rather than the symptom, then we're going to create a permanent solution. And which is, like, for instance, in the medical profession, I'm like, okay, so I have a headache, right? So if I take an aspirin, that treats the symptom. But if my headache is caused by a pinched nerve or pressure on the brain for whatever reason, that it's not sustainable. So that is one of the models that I use within my coaching to be a little bit more unconventional, not follow all the rules. Not that we're cavalier and put people's businesses at risk, but rather creating more of a sustainable growth system that is based on addressing whatever it is at the core of what's going on within an organizational structure.
One of the things that started flaring in my head, this was early on in your answer, was just the idea of how we are compelled to follow rules. And rules, I think they can be followed on that conscious, persuasive level, which is, and I'm going to go use a blunt example here because this is just what's come to my head, which is, should I run somebody over with my car? Well, I can be talked out of that pretty easily because I would go to jail and I would ruin my life as well as the life of hundreds of other people. So it's ideally not worth doing. However, you get people into that less rational state. You get people into an emotional state. Their buttons start getting pushed, tensions start building, and road rage starts to set in. It's almost as if the rules don't affect people at that subconscious level, or even at the unconscious, more the rational, like emotional based level. It's almost like they don't work at all. So I can speak in the persuasive area, but unless I'm actually afraid of following a rule, I don't think I would do it at all. How deep do you think it gets into people's brains or in people's psychology that a rule is as instinctive to follow as, like, breathing and drinking?
That's a really good question. I wonder if it goes back to
I was worried I was a little confusing with that one, by the way.
I wonder if it goes back to moral code that almost supersedes rules, if you will, in that, like the example you gave in terms of like road rage and stuff. Yes, you're right, that there are some rules that are set up to keep people safe, that are like speed rules and stuff like that, or rules of the road. But yeah, it just seems like it would be based on a person's moral compass. That just is like, if they don't have a strong moral code, and I don't mean that in a religious way or a spiritual way, but just a general human being moral compass that is about thinking about the impact of other people, then I think there's an opportunity for somebody to go off the deep end um, in terms of what they're willing to do, or like the whole road rage thing. Really, I live in Los Angeles, so that's
Oh, okay.
a common thing, and
Well,
I
it's funny
never
you talk
quite
about that.
get
Just a
it.
few hours earlier, Joseph, this happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and I never quite get it, other than people are just wound too tight. And then it goes back to, again, the symptom source solution. What is going on? What is the source of the road rage? And there's probably a lot of other things that are going on that are triggering it.
I'm going to absorb that because it's not something that I feel like I can expand on for the rest of the conversation. But the idea of like it's ingrained in someone's moral code, because then that speaks to how was someone developed, how much of it is nature versus nurture, and I think it's really fascinating. But here's the last thing that I'll do, and then I'll switch gears for us. So one of the elements to this that I've always made somewhat peace with is that certain, and maybe they're not as overt as like a law that's in the books, but almost more like societal, like unwritten rules. And one of them is the idea of, say, like the 9 to 5 work schedule. Now, a lot of people reject that and oppose that. I myself did, but if I reverse engineer it, it's something that is built in a person's best interest. And what I mean by that is, well, if you look at the average circadian rhythm, getting up and going to work at around 9 a.m. and then being at home by 5 by the time it's dark here in Canada, or, well, because of the winter time,
Right.
that just works well for a person's ability to have the energy at the time that you need to spend the energy, which is at work. And then I remembered going through elementary school, and all of these institutions were set up in my best interest. Going to school and graduating the next school, graduating the one after that, and then entering the workforce. And I believe that it was all done in earnest. But by the time I can get on the internet, I was already making my own path. And I personally felt like, I just couldn't go through the conventional path anyways. It had to be this way just because of the way my brain works. And that speaks to what you're saying about the moral code as well. What was my internal guidance system saying? What was my view of right or wrong? Which is, well, I can go to this place that is a mixture of good experiences and miserable experiences, or I can go on the internet and have a curated experience, which also makes me miserable sometimes, but at least that's my fault because it was all my choosing. So for me, the comparison is how the internet changed whose rules I was following and how I was kind of navigating the world. Do you remember a change along those lines, or something that really gave you an option to kind of move along a different path?
It's kind of interesting. It's an interesting question that you asked, because I've
Thank you.
always felt like I grew up I always say I'm German, Russian, Jewish, Catholic. So you can't get any more rule bound than that. And and I always kind of grew up with one foot on my corners are all square. My everything is dusted and it's clean and it's neat and
Hmm.
it's organized, and this is a stupid rule. So I've always gone along that path my entire life. There was never a time that I really deviated greatly from that, because it was how I was raised. But it was just enough, like on the fringe, to make me question things, to make me look at things in a different way, to just even heighten my own awareness so that I could be conscious of the choices that I was making, so that I wasn't making choices because that's what everybody did. Funny example, but so I was married at the age of 33, and I did not want children. And because I was very career minded and they just were not going to fit into the plan, because I grew up in this time where the woman stayed home and took care of the kids while the man went out and made a living. That was not me. That was not my life. But yet at the same time, when I got married, that was really out, that was extreme. And I took a lot of heat for making that decision because it was so against the grain of what we should be doing, which seems weird in this day and age, but that's what it was at the time.
I wasn't sure if there was going to be something that would compare the almighty power of the internet, but it just goes to show that like there's so much of the of what's gone on that I haven't seen. But yeah, that's a really fascinating answer. And let me say, from my point of view, I have no issue with my girlfriend leaving the house and going to work while I stay home, take care of the kid. We're not parents yet, but fingers crossed.
Well, I will say this about the internet, recognizing where the information comes on the internet, I am probably more skeptical than most because of that. I mean, it's changed dramatically. There's a lot of headlines that are really just clickbait that don't deliver on what the headline is. So what I'm finding more and more in the last maybe 4 or 5 years is that I'm more skeptical. I'm much more strategic in where I go for information, what I read, because there is so much, I think, false information and people's opinions that are on the internet. And that's great. I always tell my friends years ago, there are two things, there's fact and opinion. So there were some times that I would say, well, this is fact based on math and science or studies and research, and this is opinion. And sometimes people don't differentiate between the two online. And then there's somebody else who comes along who may be a little bit more of a novice for discernment of information online, and they believe that stuff. And as it relates to business, it may not work for them. And they may struggle years in their business by following somebody else's advice that might not work for them.
It's great that you say that because right now the TikTok algorithm is front loading me with other authors who are all giving out advice for writing. And I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit because I seem to have taken the advice before I saw it. Like, oh yeah, my character does have wants. Or, oh yeah, I do have a plan for the entirety of the series. Oh yeah, this. Oh yeah, that. But then you get a lot of this information that I don't agree with. And yeah, it does create this sense of if I'm not following this track, that I'm screwing myself, and so it creates this almost this fear of action rather than all this information should make me want to act more. But it could also have the opposite effect, which is now that I know the score, maybe it isn't worth my time. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but it's that emotional clash that I'm getting basically every time I scroll and I see a different author giving me different pieces of information. No one's contradicted each other yet. That's what I find really surprising. There hasn't been any contradictions yet.
Well, I have to say that it requires a real courageous soul to be contradictive, to be the contrarian online, because you definitely will take the hits for it. So I think a lot of people just kind of keep it to themselves.
I want to transition into your platform that we're here on the Impact Coaching podcast to share with the audience. And one thing that I wanted to do to help, I guess, create a little bit of a thread between what we talked about and what we're going to talk about, because you mentioned that you were in nursing, and one thing that I love asking this because the answers have been beyond what I could expect is, as a nurse, have any skills that came with you that helped you develop as a coach? And then, I mean, other things too, right? Anything else within your prior career that gave you a unique palette of skills that you work with now?
Well, so when I was in nursing, I worked primarily intensive care. So it was really a high stress, high risk situation, and you had to make decisions quickly, and they had to be based on facts, if you will.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say when I was in nursing, I developed a really strong analytical skill set, a really strong critical analysis skill set that allowed me to really look at the facts, analyze, and Obviously, we're not making a lot of those decisions as nurses. Sometimes in the case of ICU, where you have to act before the physician is there, you have to make those decisions in a life and death situation. But it was database decision making. And knowing also what data to, when you're speaking to the physicians about a patient in a certain situation, it might be also knowing what data is important to share with him or her. So I would have to say that really played a strong role. I went from nursing into sales
Hmm.
and I was in sales for 25 years. And the key to my success in sales was database decision making. When prior to that, I had success, which was really more based on luck. And then when the economy changed and all of that, I started really struggling until I went back to the data. And what does the data teach me? What are the numbers? What am I looking at? And making plans based on the numbers and on the data. And that was really influential in my sales career.
I'm just making an observation about this, but it's not something that immediately comes to my mind when I think of the profession of nursing. I tend to think of the nurturing side of it, which is certainly not the experience that I've particularly had with all of nurses. I remember I developed a phobia for needles because I remember having this blood work done where I had like 12 needles, and it just the phobia set in after that. So I remember telling this other nurse, just so needles they've been really scaring me lately. And she just like stone face goes, mm-hmm, and then she draws my blood. So in a way that sometimes we have to appreciate the
Yeah, I've
more
heard
like the more
that before,
yeah
right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's funny.
With the area that you specialize in is what's called the messy middle, and in preparation for this, I was trying to think of the alliterations prior to and then after that, if it's like burgeoning beginning or effervacious ending or anything like that. I don't know if there's like if there's a ladder to all of these or not. That was just the fun part of it. But I think the first step would be to let us know, like, what is the messy middle? What is this pitfall that people are and finding themselves in?
Yeah, so the messy middle it happens at various points in growth and development. The first time we generally see it is 250 to 300,000 in revenue when a company achieves that. They may start to falter. Growth starts to stall or slow down. Cash is really tight. Talent is hard to come by. Things are getting much more complex. It's a little bit spastic and chaotic. And it's a really stressful time. And most of the time, businesses at that point have reached their capacity for growth. And because the way in which they grew to that capacity, that level, what worked for them in the beginning no longer works to take them to the next step. But until they are able to unravel that, it's very difficult for them to move on. But it happens around 250, 300,000. It happens again, sometimes a minor will see it around 1.5 million, and then again at 3 to 4 million, where it's like growing and then running around in circles with like a chicken with your head cut off, and then unraveling and going to the next level.
The thing that you said out of all of that that was the most prominent to me is if someone comes to you, a company comes to you, having relied on a system that got them that far, and I can see, and I feel like people have said this too, which is, well, I mean, we've got the data here. The data shows that we made this amount of money by doing this. So that surely that validates what we're going to be doing going forward. So I think this is where an example or two might be best called for, which is
Sure.
the actual unraveling of, like, how do you unravel something that they've been reliant on so that they can become reliant on a new system to move forward.
Well, so one example that I can give you is a client that is in the marketing industry. And the company had done really well in growing to about 250, 300,000, and just they were stuck there, literally stuck there. No matter how hard the business owner worked, There was just no movement at all. It was extremely frustrating. It was for a long period of time. There were multiple discussions that were had at that point about the client, the type of client they were working with, the kind of work that they were doing for clients, and the pricing that they were charging. Those were three key pieces that really kept them stuck because they needed to really elevate their game. They needed to upgrade their client and they needed to upgrade their pricing and they actually needed to refine their services because you just get to a point where you just can't be. I think that's everything to everybody. I think that's one of the things that I see a lot when businesses start up. It's just like, who do you work with? Why I work with everybody? Oh God, no, please don't.
Mhm.
Because that's going to be a nightmare for you. It took a little bit, it took a while for that to unravel because that meant going out, redefining who the new client is going to be, getting that new client, acquiring that new client, limiting the number of the services provided, charging what needs to be charged for those services, for the level of expertise that this client brought to the table. So there was this middle part where they were starting to make the transition and where they could finally let go of the others. You can't just, do the big leap and jump off because that's too risky. And there's a huge mindset that goes along with that. It's scary to make those changes when you have been stuck in an area where you've been working with the same kind of client for years at the same price. And now you're thinking about increasing your prices. And what happens if everybody all of a sudden, quits buying from us if we increase our prices, which never happens.
Mhm.
But so that was one example. They then grew to the next level, which was, I think, probably about 650, 700. And then it was a matter of the talent. They needed better talent. They needed talent that was not only good at what they did, but that were self-sufficient. Because as a business owner, again, this is one of the things that I see with a lot of people starting up is they want to get the best talent that they can for the least amount of dollars. And they're going to train this talent up. Well, that's great for a while, but you can't do that once you get to 750 or so because you just don't have the time as a business owner to
Mhm.
babysit people. You need to have people on board that are ready to run from the very beginning. Well, the problem at that point was cash flow. And as it is again with a lot of business owners, it's scary to get funded when you're bootstrapping, right? You're not working with angel investors, you're not working with VC firms and or private equity firms, you just want to do your work. And this individual did. They actually went and got some funding for the business. But before they did that, they worked out a very extensive spreadsheet on what the costs were going to be, what the expectations were, what the talent was, and how they were going to pay it back. So it eliminated a lot of the ambiguity, like, oh, I'm taking out this loan. How am I going to pay it back? They had a plan for what that was going to look like. And they brought in the talent that they needed. They got the funding, brought in the talent, and then that elevated them to the next level. So that's kind of an example of a journey that one client took, had two different spots that they were a little stuck.
Mhm. I have a couple of follow-ups in regards to that, and these are technical questions. So, with wanting to have a new client avatar and work with clients who are able to pay higher invoices, the limiting thought going through my mind is how do we sell people on these services if there is a gap between how much we've been paid in the past versus how much we expect to be paid in the future. So what do we do? Do we do pro bono work to try to get into that field? Do we upgrade our services? Because I would think that if I'm showing my past client Rolodex and I'm indicating how much that they've compensated my company, then these other people say, well, okay, you've done really well at that range, but we're at this range. So how do you prove to me that you're the viable person that we're going to work with?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't think I would show anybody what I built other people in the past, because you
Yeah,
were,
true.
but
Yeah.
there are two buttons in everybody's head. One says price and the other says value. And when the value outweighs the price is seldom an objection. Particularly if the client can really afford it. There are some people that may want to hire you. They love what you do. They believe in the value that they provide, but they just don't have the budget. Then that's not really your client.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I realize that my lack of working in that $250,000 field is showing by the fact that yes, we don't show people the physical dollars. Although I would expect that like a company might be able to do their due diligence and just kind of suss out what rates people were working with.
Most of the B2B companies that I work with, that I coach, nobody puts their pricing on their website because everybody's situation, unless you're providing a commodity. But in the B2B professional service sectors, you can't, it's really hard to commoditize a service because then you're just producing widgets, which may not work for a client. So there's nobody that I can think of that puts their pricing on the website. But
Hmm.
the other thing too is, let's say somebody does put their pricing on. I know we put our pricing on for solutions on the fly. That also, though, is again about building value. How do you build value? How do you articulate the value that you bring to the table? Right. And like for me, it's 27 years of experience of what I've seen allows me to charge a different rate today than I did 20 years ago
Hmm.
because I'm able to get to the point of what a client needs much more quickly based on that.
Hmm. I did look at the pricing for that while I was checking out your website, and what I think it does in my mind, if I were hypothetically thinking about taking that service, is that it just gets me to rate how emergent my problem actually is. And as soon as it goes past, say the max price point for the most amount of time that I can book, then in my mind I'm going, oh, this is a really serious problem. This is definitely going to be worth it. Likewise, okay, this problem is actually solvable. Probably we don't need to put down the capital for it. So unless like you're also someone who's really paranoid and have seen patterns like this before and say, if we don't take care of this now, this could end up costing a lot more. So why don't we just pay the amount now and have someone's guidance to sort this out? Actually, I just want to derail the conversation for a little bit because this is something funny that happened to me yesterday. That was very much along the lines of like value, cost, pressure analysis. So I'm on a new laptop and she runs well, but has sort of decided to stop working for certain reasons, which has largely been due to over power consumption. If I plug my secondary monitor into it and I use it as a power source, then my laptop just goes completely like off. I can't turn it back on. So I bring it to the computer store once. Technician opens up behind the back, plugs out the battery, puts it back in. Really easy peasy, like a 2 second thing. Shuts it back up, and shut me up as well for that matter. So everything's cool. Then yesterday morning, after following the rules that I had set so that it wouldn't happen again, it happened again. And so I bring it back, a different fella this time. This time, the fella says, okay, so you're going to need to leave this with us for 2 weeks. It has to go into our booking system for us to be able to fix it. And I said, but I know what the issue is. I unscrewed half of them on the way here. I just need you to put that battery out and put it back in for me. And he says, I'm sorry, but it has to be booked into the system. And so I'm stuck like, okay, I'm panicking. I need this computer for work. It's got stuff on it. So I either give it to him for 2 weeks and figure out a plan B, or I unscrew it right there in front of him and fix the battery myself. That's what I had to do. I had no other choice. I had to fix it on the spot. So in front of the guy who I would have paid to do this, I opened it up, take the battery out, put it back in, follow the guy's instructions, close it back up. I go home, and now here we are doing a podcast. So that's a situation where like it's in that moment, right? And I need help, and I would have been able to help them, but their value offer was just not at all
No,
practical. It wasn't even close.
no, absolutely not. And in my mind, to me, if it happened the second time, I'd be asking for a replacement.
Oh,
Because I'm like,
I'm giving it 3 strikes. The
yeah,
reason being is
well,
that
you're much more generous than
yeah,
I am. So if I had two, that would have been it. So
I everyone has told me it's probably time to turn it in, but the only reason why I'm dying on this hill, and I'm sorry, my phone is ringing, but that's just life, is because I believe it was my mismanagement pushing the laptop in a way that laptops were not meant to be pushed. So I think these have been my fault. Once I do something very normal and pedestrian and it still breaks, then okay, then it's yeah, I'm gonna have to go pay him another visit. So, but that's just like what you got me thinking of is like we are in these situations where we're panicking and we need a solution. And so, in a situation like that where it's a couple $100 to like have somebody at the very least, if nothing else, just to talk and work it through, that could go such a long way.
yeah. Well, and I will say with the solution on the fly, it really is designed for clients that I've worked with
Mm-hmm.
that maybe worked with me for a period of 6 to 9 months. We work through a specific challenge or area or whatever, and they don't need somebody to talk to or collaborate with on an ongoing basis. They just need a pop in every once in a while, right? And
Yeah.
so that is a great service to provide for them so it doesn't lock them into, oh, now I'm doing this for 3 months or for the next month. No.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, because I think to your point, if somebody doesn't know me and they go to the solutions on the fly and they see the rate, they're going to go, oh, no way.
Yeah.
I would probably be the same way. I'd be skeptical if I didn't know them.
Mm-hmm. We got about 15 minutes left, but because I know we gotta get you. Actually, we only have 12 minutes left. I was looking at the wrong clock. So, what I wanted to ask you about that I alluded to earlier on in the episode was dealing with burnout at the level that you've experienced with. And I haven't talked to anybody about burnout in a long time. It's something that I've tried to like. Okay, if I'm experiencing it, I wanted to experience it and not have these symptoms and then let myself off easy by saying it's burnout. So that's sort of like my relationship with it. I tend to look at it and think, okay, maybe I need to exercise more, clean up my diet. There's a lot of little things that I feel like I could do whenever I feel like it's getting to that point. So it's for me, it's always been about habit management and healthy lifestyle management. What does burnout look like when you're working with entrepreneurs who have that level of pressure that they're dealing with?
Yeah, it's pure exhaustion. It's mental, physical, emotional exhaustion. And I personally, I think it's extremely dangerous. I hate seeing it when it shows up, when people get to that point. It's hard sometimes to convince an entrepreneur to take a 15-minute walk every day. It doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
see, I think the part of the issue, I think, with trying to, like you had mentioned about maintenance, different maintenance on your habits and whatnot. I'm really about prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, don't wait till you get there and then take action, because you're so far behind already, the 8 ball, that it takes you a while to get back. But build in little micro movements if you can, little things that you can do. And I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but if you're the kind of person, or if an entrepreneur is the kind of person that just gets up in the morning and the first thing they do is get on their computer and they're on their computer all day, the idea of going an hour 3 times a week to the gym is ridiculous. In their own minds, I don't have the time. But if you can stay, let's just take 10 minutes, 10 minutes 3 times a day or 3 times a week, and just gradually build up from there, I think is so important. And then it's about, again, being really firm on the boundaries, on having that time when you walk out the door. The one thing that I found in working with entrepreneurs, somehow they don't realize the value of their own health in the equation of financial growth, achieving revenue, acquiring clients. That's just as important, I think, as having a sales and marketing funnel. Because if you, as the owner, get sick, the business, then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
And so you really have to look at that as a factor, just like you look at, okay, here's my plan, here's my goal for the year. Here's what we're going to accomplish. And the plan is we're going to use SEO and we're going to use Google Ads and we're going to use this. And then what is the healthcare plan that goes along with that to keep everybody healthy in the process?
For, I guess, the ones erring on the skeptical side, do you have to frame health as a either like a resource for productivity or as insurance? Is there a certain way that, like, I don't know, perhaps like an interesting alternative way that you've had to convince people to take their health seriously?
Um, I think that there's a readiness for it. And what I always try and do is, again, collaborate with them to say, what can you do? What do you think you can do? Let's not build some pie in the sky kind of program, but just to get them the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit. Where can we start? Even if it's getting meal services or anything like that, that will help them to get on a healthy path. Um, Although I had a health crisis a couple of years ago, wasn't caused by burnout, but it really taught me a lot about the way I was working and how I didn't really have to work that way. I just thought I had to work that way. It was like a mental exchange. If I work really hard like this and work long hours and et cetera, then I will have this. This is what life gives back. And what I realized is that is hardly the case.
Right, right. It reminds me of, I don't know all the details to the story, but it was about, I think, either like a construction worker or a miner or someone who was competing with the machine to try to output as much as the machine could output.
Oh,
And
really?
I think he won, but I think it killed him in the process. There was just
Oh,
something
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
like a Pyrrhic victory, something along those lines. Yeah, a couple of my friends in the content creation space, we almost take it as like a badge of honor by like not taking days off or just continuing to put in day after day of work. And I certainly am not that. I take my days off. And yet at the same time, I look at my total gross earnings and think, there's a few zeros less there than a lot of other people who are doing other things. And so it's I don't know if they're what we would call reverse burnout, where it's just like almost like a lack of being able to get into that work state and be able to stay there. But there is definitely a correlation between having to put the time in and having that the resources to show for it.
Well, I think the issue is too, is like, again, going back to this one business owner that I was speaking about about their business, it was also, because when you have the volume of work, you don't have the pleasure or the privilege of walking away from it at the end of the day too. Sometimes there is just that working late at night. It just has to be done. But then there are still things that can be done, like how do we deal with email and how do we deal with interruptions and all this other stuff that we can look at. But I think the other thing that I look at is that becomes part of the plan of what's on your plate that you're doing, that someone who you could pay $25 an hour to do or $30 an hour. Let's see if we can start moving some of these things off your plate or delegating to other people. Because that's the other thing too that I find with entrepreneurs in the messy middle is they have a really hard time delegating to other
Mm-hmm.
people
It's
because
a
no one's
it's a
as good as us.
Yeah, it's a standards issue. I've been hooked on to Hell's Kitchen for the last couple of months now, and so you just have to picture someone at, like, Chef Gordon Ramsay standards, but also someone who's trying to cook, do the appetizers, do the meats, do the fish, do the garnish, do everything, and either like, well, I don't want to like put other people through what Chef Ramsay puts people through, so it's almost like I don't want people to suffer the way I'm suffering too.
Yeah. The other thing I would say to you about the balance thing is I always look at it as a challenge. Like, okay, so if I generated this amount of revenue and I worked this amount of time, what would happen? What would I have to do to generate twice as much revenue in half the time? That might be a little extreme, but maybe it's a 20% increase and in 20% less time. And then it becomes an exercise in innovation. We think
Mhm.
about how do we approach things differently and what did we do before? Did they get us the results we want? If not, what do we do differently? So I love the challenge of that.
You know what? I like that a lot too. Yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about that one. But with that, I know we gotta start wrapping this bad boy up.
Yes.
I know we gotta get you on out of here. So the final question that I wanted to pose to you is in two parts. What are sort of the challenges that you're working on a day like today? Some of the they could be small technical things like we're looking into our social media, we're looking into our ranking, whatever that is. And then what is your vision for how things are going to go in the next 5 years?
Well, so I would say the biggest thing that I'm working on right now is figuring out the best way to reach the entrepreneur that's in the messy middle, because usually they're so busy, they don't have time to research or, whatever the case might be. They're not poking around on LinkedIn. How do we reach them?
Hmm.
Right. And so that's probably the biggest challenge that I have.
Because they might not even realize that there is a problem. They might just
Right.
think it's
Well,
Monday.
right. And they don't have time. They don't have
Yeah.
the time. They're not, it's not like in the beginning stages where you got plenty of time to research problems on your, having this problem. You research it, go and Google search it, but there just isn't that available. Um, and as far as the next 5 years, I think for me, what I think about is because I continue to work with clients that are growing, and I have the privilege of continuing to work with them, which is such a joy.
Hmm.
And for me, it's all about staying one step ahead so that as they're thinking about the next steps for their business, I'm already thinking ahead of them. Right now, this year, we're looking at economic uncertainty and an election year and the impact that that will have so that we can put strategies in place to help them alleviate that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And then, like I said, just staying ahead of them and then retiring, maybe.
Possibly. Yeah.
Possibly. I tried it once, I didn't like it, so
Yeah. I don't see myself retiring. I just see myself like slowing down as much as humanly possible. But my views on retirement and economics is a whole other show, a whole other program.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
There you go, there you go.
But I'm definitely fascinated by the subject of it. So with that, this has been the Impactful Coaching Podcast. Jackie, I was really really happy to have this conversation. I learned a lot today. It's great because when I review the content and I'm less distracted by the blinking lights I need to run the show, I get to actually really sit and listen and pick up on some of the other details too that I didn't get on my first go through. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Oh,
And
thank
then
you.
if there's anything you want to let the audience know right before we close out, feel free,
No,
where we can find you
yes.
online or
So, right, if you're in the messy middle, come visit us. We have a mastermind group of like-minded people that are in the same position. We'd love to have you. Just go to Synovatia, SYNNOVATIA.com.
fantastic. And those of you who want to reach out to me, it is Joseph at impactfulcoachingpodcast.com. Joseph is spelled Joseph. The rest is spelled the way you're used to. And with that, we have hit the hour mark. And my philosophy as an interviewer is as follows: always run out of time, never run out of questions.